Okay, so what we're looking at now is what people really think about today's market research reports. So I'll just give you a brief agenda of what we're planning to cover in this section. So we'll take you through the big picture, and we will have one methodology slide. Then we're going to have a look at the big questions. How good are market research reports? What are their strengths and weaknesses? And are things improving? And have a look at what else we've learnt. We'll finish off with some summary and recommendations. And of course, there'll be a chance for you to ask your questions in a Q&A session. So when we ask report creators what sort of quality they think they're delivering, they would describe something that perhaps looks like the Sydney Harbour Bridge. But when we say to people who are receiving reports, tell us about the quality of reports you're receiving, they describe something that perhaps is a bit more like this bridge. Perfectly functional, sound, but perhaps not quite as pretty, not quite as visually appealing, and perhaps no wow factor. So what do people think about market research reports? And you've obviously had a bit of an entree into some of these results before we get there, but I'll just give you the dreaded methodology slide just so you know what you're dealing with. So we had about 505 people take part in this study. These are all people who are connected either directly or indirectly to NewMR, and it was an English language survey. So we're not making any claims about this being a representative sample. It's very much a convenient sample. In terms of profile, about 58% of people were market research suppliers, 22% clients, and 20% in that dreaded other category. Now, these tend to be people from panel companies and other software companies, people who supply services to the market research industry. And in terms of a geographic spread, we had 31% from Europe, 25% from North America, 24% from APAC, and 21% from other regions. And 77% of people who took part in this study discussed a report they'd created, and 23% discussed a report they had received. So, big question, is it better to give than receive? And we've talked about this earlier in this presentation, but if you have a look at the two columns there, we've got creating and receiving, you'll see that 64% of people who are creating reports are rating them as excellent or very good, whereas only 24% of people who are receiving reports are rating them as excellent or very good. So there's that gap we're talking about. So there's a 40 percentage points difference in that rating between people who create reports and people who receive reports. So that's where we're saying we were all expecting a gap, but we weren't expecting that gap to be quite so big. And then you can see the rest of the distribution there. So people who create reports, 26% good, and then 9% of people create reports, still rating them as very poor, or fair. And then on the receiving side, we can see 35% good, and then almost 40% of people who receive reports rating them as very poor, or fair. So we talked about the fun poll, where we said to people, tell us what you think that gap is. Now, this is a small sample. It was really just to kind of answer that curious question. So what were people's expectations about that receiver-creator gap? That's 40%. And you can see there, 23%. So about a quarter of people guessed that answer correctly. And then we've got about a third of people saying 30% gap, another third of people saying 20%. So most people were guessing that there would be a fairly large gap, but not quite as big as it is. So let's have a look at who was unhappy with their last report. So if we, by unhappy with their last report, we're saying if you thought it was only very poor, or fair, you're unhappy with it. So that was 16% of our total participants and 39% of people who've received reports. So we've got some other groups that are above that 16%. So 33% of clients are unhappy with their reports. Of people who think reports are worse than 2 years ago, 26% are unhappy with them. And for people who prioritise detailed reports, 20% are unhappy with those. So what were the poor points? So here we focused on the receivers, and the question that was asked was, in what ways, if any, was the report poor? So we've got 88 verbatim comments here, and you just note that 11% said there was nothing that was poor. So 46%, the reports had a lack of insights, lack of actionable recommendations, and a lack of a business focus. And in terms of, like a verbatim response that gives us, an example of the sorts of comments we got there, the report was very findings focused, generally followed the flow of the questionnaire rather than aligning with the business issues that needed to be solved. Lack of straightforward business application. Too much detail, not enough insights and recommendations. And what are some other poor points? Too long, just charting numbers. Too boring, not engaging enough. It was very boring without useful insights. Not enough visual data. Data visualization must be improved. Not deep enough. Analysis conducted at a total level only, no drilling down. And of course, there were some shockers. Disappointing, but there were some. So bad methodology counts as a shocker. The data was not in sync with the actual market scenario. Errors in reporting, spelling mistakes, no benchmarks, no summary or recommendations. Sample size was small and skewed, not covering the total market threshold. The data was constantly smoothed by using too many averages. Critical conclusions and recommendations presented with insufficient evidence. So there were some general good points though. It's not all bad news. So again, we're focusing on the report receivers. And the question that people are answering here is, in what ways, if any, was the report good? And we've got 91 comments here. So one of the really big good points was accessible to business. Now, here are some comments that give us a sense of what accessible to business means. Narrative flow, storytelling, clean design, good visuals. Told a story and easy to read. Good charting. Charting was done really well done. Great infographics work. Met the objectives. Recommendations, practical impact, business focus, answered questions. The report was concise and focused on responding to the objectives of market research. It helped us solve the decision problem that existed. Some other good points: depth, comprehensive, full of insight and detailed analytics. Concise, clean, limited number of slides, sticking to the main ideas of the slides and charts. To the point and organised. Methodology, very clever use of conjoint and data modelling to tease out relative effectiveness of different endorsements. Well-grounded method, robust, reliable, accurate.
Thank you, Sue. So I'm going to pick up now on one or two of the other aspects in the study. And one of those questions that we heard about earlier was we asked people to say, do you think reports now are better or worse than 2 years ago? And I'm going to look at three groups. So the buyers, users of reports, the clients, the market research agencies and the consultants, the MR providers, and then the suppliers to the market research industry, the panel company, the software companies, and so on. And there's a lot of people saying things are getting better. It doesn't quite make the halfway mark, and the buyers are less convinced than the suppliers. Technically, of course, the suppliers probably know most about what tools are available, and the buyers know most about whether those tools have been used well. By the time we add in the same, it comes to nearly everybody in all of the categories. So I think listening to what Mike and Neil said in their presentation, looking at the comments in the data, a lot of things have improved, but the goalposts are moving. They need to keep improving. We try to find back priorities. Now, we asked this in a way that was a fixed set of things. So people saw these 6 propositions here. Should it be concise or detailed? Should it be insightful or objective? Should it be practical or rigorous? And to some extent, they're conflicting pairs within that. And then we give them the chance to add an open-ended one if they wanted to. And when we did that, you saw some of this earlier, but here is the really detailed picture of this. Insightful, almost everybody prioritizes that. If I've got to pick 3 things from a list, I'm likely to pick insightful. And the 2 that make it to more than halfway through that list are concise and practical. And that is why Mike and Neil prioritize that in the method that they have for producing these reports that are insightful, concise, and practical. There are people, however, who prioritize objective. There are people who prioritize rigorous. There are some people who prioritize detailed, not so many. But of course, if you want detailed, then you're probably not going to be quite so concise in what you want in your output. And then there are people who are willing to click the other button and type in what it is they think the other should be. And that's quite an interesting category too. When we look at those priorities, they are overwhelmingly the same. So I'm just going to show you a few cases where they are not the same. So this is the inelegantly named geographic region Other, which is Africa, Central and South America, and Middle East. So we're talking about markets that are less mature in terms of size, volume, and history. And in those markets, we see a higher priority for objectivity and a lower priority for conciseness. So that is a nudge that maybe in those areas you really want to be talking to your client to make sure you've got the right priorities for each client. In the APAC region, we see a higher priority for practical and a higher priority for concise than we do in the other regions, and a bit less on rigorous. We go to the suppliers, the software companies, the panel companies, and we see a higher priority for detailed. And if you think about the efforts they're making to give us tools that will enable us to look at every break by everything, well, yeah, that's going to build towards the mindset, and a slightly lower priority for concise. The only other place where right through the data there was anything interesting and big enough to pull out as a separate thing was in North America, where objectivity was less of a priority, and concise was, like in APAC, a higher priority. But between the receivers and the creators, between the buyers and the providers, there were no interesting, substantial differences between what they prioritize. And this is why we get a lot of guidance coming for what is the right way to produce a report for most people. When we looked at the people, as I say, who went to the effort of clicking the other button and then typed in what it was, we got some insights to other ways that people are looking at priorities. And the first is a group of people who want it to be pretty. Now, this is not people who say, I want really meaningful, data-driven infographics. These are people who are saying that it's got to be pretty, it's got to be visually appealing. The next one is actionable. Now, when Mike and Neil say practical, they mean actionable. But for other people, they want it really spelling out that actionable, applicable is a key phrase. We saw some evidence from Sue's comment about the shockers. Not all research is accurate. And if you've been on the receiving end of data that's not been accurate, then you're going to prioritize in future reports accuracy. And engagement, so compelling, telling a good story, an emotional level. And we heard some comments about that in the Q&A with Mike about the trade-off between being really effective with repetition and perhaps being a little bit less engaging. So again, you're going to want to look at what each specific client wants. Now, if we look at that data, that prioritized data, and we look now just at the 110 clients in the database, the people who are actually buying the research, a fifth of them listed all 3 of those as in their top 3. So you would absolutely get it right by delivering those 3 things to the fifth of the whole sample. But another, nearly 60%, had at least 2 of those in their top 3. So 4 out of every 5 clients have at least 2 of these 3 priorities in their top 3. You are going to be right a lot of the time if this is where you pitch your results. Yeah, about 20% of people are not so geared up on these. Insightful is pretty important for this group, but less so the other 2. So if you don't know your client in detail, go insightful, practical, concise. If you can, double check that they're not the 1 in 5 who've got a slightly different set of priorities, and you're going to want to tailor what you deliver to those priorities. Remembering, of course, that within any one room, you can have different people, different priorities, and different knowledge sets. There's a question that I've added on the end to pretty much every survey I've run for the last 30 years, which is finally, is there anything else you would like to add about market research reports or this survey? So the topic will change obviously from study to study, and you get some wonderful insights. And this is what Mike was talking about in his presentation, other findings. So this is some other findings. And we've pulled out 5 here, and the first one is very long, but it's great evidence of the sort of things you can find out if you give people in a quantitative survey a chance to talk. So 1, the biggest improvement we can do is write the report for the reader, not the researcher. 2, don't tell me what's obvious on the page, tell me what it means to me. 3, I worry the push to storytelling has gone overboard. We research people, and the story of large groups of people is never that simple or straightforward. Does assuming everyone looks like your persona do more harm than good? 4, make sure you understand what the business questions and assumptions are before even attempting to write the report. The biggest thing that invalidates a report in the minds of business people is wasting their time with what they think is irrelevant or impossible. So lots and lots of depth there. We've got some other wonderful things, and we're just going to show you 5 that maps out that space. So here's the second one. A current problem is the excessive use, misinterpretation of the term infographics. A good infographic is worth its weight in gold and usually involves a good graphic designer to deliver the best impact. However, I work with one client team who thinks that adding numerous icons to an otherwise dull and pointless chart means infographics. Third one, and when I first read this one, I thought, well, I disagree with that. And then I really read the intent. So democratization of data will continue to lead where market research reporting is going. Dashboards and live views will shape reporting trends in the coming years. This person is not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. They're saying this is happening. Because there are going to be so many dashboards, that's going to shape the attention span and how people look at information. Apologies for my appalling accent. Devono essere pratici et semplici da leggere. Must be practical and easy to read. I mean, that's such a lovely summary. Practical and easy to read. And finally, I see folks having to walk the fine line and getting confused between a report and a presentation. I see folks not seeing or understanding the difference, or having a client require one to present a report. So we can see that we're getting a lot of information that, yes, there is an overall story, and there is also a massive detail and difference between people. So that leads to summary and recommendations, and following Mike's advice, we've bridged the 2 together. So first summary point, creators think their reports are better than the receivers think they are. That means you need to do research with the people who receive your reports. Talk to them, ask them, what 2 things were good about that report and which 2 things do I need to improve? Almost everybody prioritizes insightful. Well, that's okay, but find out what does insightful mean for your clients, for the receivers of your reports. Concise and practical are important to many people. You need the skill. You need to be able to produce the sort of templated report that Mike and Neil were showing a few moments ago as a basic skill. It won't always be the report you produce, but it will be the report you will often produce, and you should be really efficient and capable and competent at producing it. 20% of people prioritize other things. So always check that this is one of the clients that wants that concise, practical one. It's perhaps this particular client is somebody who likes a rigorous, objective analysis of all of the issues. And it's not going to be as concise. It will still be as concise as it should be, but maybe it's going to be 100 pages. And finally, easy to read, including storytelling and visuals, are key strands. Meeting the business needs is necessary, but it's not sufficient. You've got to make the whole thing, get people into the room, be palatable, be absorbed, and be adopted. So thank you very much. And Sue and I look forward to any questions you might have.